The night my daughter placed her spoon down 3 times, I almost missed it. I was reaching for the breadbasket, half listening to Marcus describe his investment portfolio, something about emerging markets and 12% annual returns, when I heard it. 3 small taps, porcelain against porcelain, barely audible over the dinner conversation. I looked up, and everything on the surface appeared perfectly normal. But I knew better, because that signal wasn't something anyone else at the table would ever recognize. I had taught it to her when she was just a child, back when she didn't yet have the words to explain fear, only the instinct to feel it. My name is Daniel Hargrove, I'm 61, and I spent more than 3 decades in fraud examination, a career that quietly rewires how you see people, how you listen, not just to what's said, but to what's carefully avoided. Retirement didn't soften that instinct. If anything, it sharpened it, especially after my wife Carol passed, and silence became my constant companion. My daughter Sarah, now 34, had rebuilt herself slowly after a relationship years ago that left her cautious, almost guarded to a fault. So when she told me about Marcus, I listened not just to her words but to the tone behind them, the rare lightness I hadn't heard in years. That mattered more than anything I could dig up. And I did dig, just enough to satisfy old habits. Marcus Veld looked clean on paper, polished even, but there were gaps, subtle inconsistencies that didn't prove anything but refused to sit quietly in the back of my mind. Still, I chose to trust her judgment, at least outwardly. The night of her birthday dinner, Marcus arrived early, just enough to establish presence, not enough to seem eager, and from the moment he stepped inside, everything about him was measured, deliberate, almost rehearsed in its perfection. He said the right things at the right times, noticed the details that would matter, even spoke about my late wife with a tone that felt practiced, yet convincing. Sarah lit up around him, and that alone made me hold my concerns back, because I had learned the hard way that moving too soon can do more damage than silence. But then came those 3 taps, soft but unmistakable, and suddenly everything shifted beneath the surface. I didn't react outwardly. I simply redirected the conversation, drawing Marcus into deeper territory, letting him speak, letting him reveal himself, in the way people always do when they believe they're in control. He spoke fluently about investments, about strategies, about returns that sounded just plausible enough to avoid suspicion in a casual setting. But every word he said felt constructed, not shared. After dinner, when Sarah stepped away, Marcus made his first real move, subtle but direct, mentioning my retirement funds as if it were a natural extension of conversation, planting the seed without pressing it, the way experienced operators always do. I kept my expression neutral, but inside the pieces were beginning to align. By the time he left, I knew one thing with certainty. Sarah's signal hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been a warning, and I intended to find out exactly what she was warning me about. That same night, I reached out to someone I trusted more than instinct alone, a former colleague, with the kind of investigative precision that leaves no room for doubt, and within 48 hours, everything I had suspected took shape in ways far more dangerous than I had hoped. Marcus Veld wasn't entirely real, at least not in the way he presented himself. His past carried another name, another pattern, and more importantly, other victims, women who had trusted him the same way Sarah had begun to, women whose lives had intersected with his charm, only to be quietly dismantled through carefully constructed financial manipulation. What made it worse wasn't just the money involved, it was the method, the emotional architecture behind it, the way he built trust piece by piece until doubt felt like betrayal. And then came the realization that hit harder than anything else. Sarah wasn't his primary target, I was. She was the bridge, the carefully chosen connection that would give him access to something far more valuable. That understanding forced me to slow down, because this wasn't just about exposing him, it was about doing it without losing her in the process. I had seen too many cases where the victim defends the person hurting them, not out of ignorance, but because by the time the truth surfaces, it threatens everything they've emotionally invested. So instead of confrontation, I chose strategy. I told Sarah I was open to hearing more about Marcus's investment ideas, enough to encourage a meeting, enough to let him believe the door was open. The setup was simple, but every detail mattered. I prepared quietly, ensuring that when the moment came, there would be no room for denial, no space for him to twist the narrative. When Marcus arrived that Saturday, he was exactly as composed as before, confident, prepared, presenting his opportunity with the same polished precision. But this time I controlled the environment. I asked questions not to learn but to observe, to see how he navigated pressure, how he responded. When the conversation shifted slightly, outside his rehearsed comfort zone, he handled it well, almost too well, until I introduced something he couldn't fully anticipate. The presence of external verification, the suggestion that his carefully managed world might be examined by someone who knew exactly where to look. It was a small shift, almost invisible, but I saw it in his eyes, that fraction of a second where control slipped, just enough to confirm everything. He didn't panic, he didn't run, but he adjusted, pulling back, attempting to reset the situation, and that alone told me more than any document ever could. By the time he stood to leave, the balance had already shifted. He knew the ground beneath him wasn't as stable as he thought, and I knew we were close to ending whatever game he believed he was playing. What he didn't know was that the next move wasn't his anymore. When I opened the door, the final piece fell into place, because the presence waiting outside wasn't a coincidence. It was the conclusion of a process that had been building quietly from the moment Sarah tapped that spoon. Marcus held himself together as he left, but there was no mistaking the realization settling over him that the carefully constructed identity he relied on was beginning to unravel, not through accusation, but through exposure. Once he was gone, the silence inside the house felt different, heavier but clearer, like something hidden had finally been brought into the light. Sarah stood there holding the remnants of what she had believed in, not shattered but processing, connecting the instinct she had felt with the truth now standing in front of her. When she asked how long I had known, I told her the truth because at that point, honesty mattered more than protection. She didn't break the way I had feared. Instead, she steadied herself, the same quiet strength her mother had carried, and made a decision that surprised no one who truly knew her. She didn't want to forget it. She wanted to see it through, to make sure that what almost happened to her wouldn't happen to someone else without consequence. The days that followed weren't about confrontation. They were about clarity, about putting together the pieces in a way that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. And through it all, something else began to settle between us. Not just relief, but understanding. That signal, something so small, something created years ago in a completely different context, had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had bridged the gap between instinct and action, between fear and response, as things moved forward beyond our control. Into investigations and processes that take time, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. But not quite the same, because moments like that leave a mark, not in a way that weakens you, but in a way that sharpens what you already know. One evening, as we stood in the hallway placing something new beside an old memory, Sarah spoke about passing that idea forward, creating a way for others, even children, to signal when something feels wrong but words fail them. And in that moment, I realized that what began as a quiet warning had become something larger, a reminder that awareness, once learned, doesn't disappear. It evolves, it protects, it continues. Later that night, after she left and the house returned to its familiar stillness, I paused for a moment, looking at the life that had been, the life that continued, and without thinking too much about it, I tapped the wall gently 3 times, not out of fear but out of acknowledgement that sometimes the smallest signals are the ones that save you.